I'll never forget the summer my wife, Clara, and I decided to take a chance on a dream. At 72, with creaky knees and a lifetime of memories behind us, we figured it was now or never. Our kids were grown, our mortgage paid off, and the travel brochures piling up on the kitchen table were practically begging us to leave our quiet little suburb for a while. Clara's eyes sparkled as she flipped through glossy pages of Italian vineyards and cobblestone streets. "Harold," she said one evening, her voice soft but firm, "let's go to Italy. We've earned it." I couldn't argue. We'd spent decades scrimping and saving, raising 3 kids in a modest split-level house on Maple Lane. Retirement had been good to us, peaceful if a bit predictable. But Italy? That was a leap. Still, Clara's enthusiasm was contagious, and before I knew it, we were booking flights and a 2-week tour through Tuscany. The only hitch was the house. We couldn't just leave it empty. There were plants to water, mail to collect, and that old finicky furnace in the basement that liked to sputter if you didn't check it now and then. That's when Clara suggested asking Tom Delaney, our neighbor 2 doors down. Tom was a wiry fellow in his late 50s, always tinkering in his garage or mowing his lawn with military precision. He'd lived on Maple Lane almost as long as we had, though we'd never been close, just the occasional wave or chat about the weather. "He's reliable," Clara insisted. "He's always home, and he's got that look about him, like he'd notice if a squirrel sneezed in our yard." I wasn't so sure. Tom struck me as a bit too eager to please, always offering to help with odd jobs around the neighborhood. But Clara had a point. We needed someone, and he was right there. So, one crisp Saturday morning, I shuffled over to Tom's place, my cane tapping the sidewalk. He was in his driveway, polishing a vintage motorcycle that gleamed like a mirror. "Tom," I called, "Clara and I are heading to Italy for a couple of weeks. Could you keep an eye on the house? Water the ferns, grab the mail, that sort of thing." His face lit up, a wide grin spreading beneath his salt and pepper mustache. "Harold, I'd be honored," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You two go enjoy yourselves. I'll treat your place like it's my own." I nodded, grateful but uneasy. Something about his quick agreement nagged at me like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. Still, Clara was thrilled when I told her, and we spent the next few days packing, laughing about how we'd manage with our rickety old suitcases. The morning we left, I handed Tom the spare key, and he waved us off from the porch like a proud uncle. As our taxi pulled away, I glanced back at our house, its faded yellow siding glowing in the dawn light. I had no idea it'd be the last time I'd see it the way it was. The flight to Italy was a blur of cramped seats and lukewarm coffee, but when we touched down in Florence, all the aches melted away. Clara squeezed my hand as we stepped into the warm Italian sun, the air thick with the scent of olive trees and history. Our tour began the next day, a whirlwind of medieval towns, rolling hills, and pasta that made my taste buds dance. I'd grumble about the cobblestones, murder on my knees, but Clara just laughed, snapping photos of me leaning on my cane like some weathered explorer. One afternoon, we sat at a cafe in Siena, sipping espresso and watching a street musician pluck a mandolin. "Harold," Clara said, her eyes misty, "this is what I always pictured for us." I smiled, reaching for her hand. She was right, it felt like a reward, a golden chapter after years of hard work. Back home, our lives had been steady, uneventful. Here, every moment sparkled with possibility. I even bought her a little silver necklace from a vendor, a delicate thing shaped like a grapevine. She wore it every day after that. But even in paradise, my mind wandered back to Maple Lane. I'd left Tom a list: water the ferns twice a week, check the furnace, lock up at night. Simple stuff. He texted us once, the day after we left, "All good here. Enjoy Italy." Clara teased me for worrying. "Tom's got it under control," she'd say, waving off my frowns. I wanted to believe her. He'd always seemed harmless, if a bit nosy. Once, years back, I'd caught him peering over our fence while I trimmed the hedges, asking about our rose bushes like they were state secrets. I brushed it off then, but now halfway across the world, that memory prickled. One night, in a quaint inn near Montepulciano, I couldn't sleep. The room was cozy, all stone walls and creaky beams, but I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Clara snored softly beside me, her necklace glinting in the moonlight. I kept picturing Tom in our house, wandering the halls, flipping light switches, maybe poking around where he shouldn't. It was silly, I told myself. We'd known him for years. He was just doing us a favor. Still, I fished my phone from the nightstand and scrolled through our security camera app. We'd installed a cheap system a while back, mostly to scare off raccoons. The feed was spotty overseas, but I saw the front porch, quiet and dark. No Tom. No nothing. Just shadows. I set the phone down, chalking it up to jet lag and too much Chianti. Tomorrow, we'd visit a vineyard, taste wines older than our marriage. I forced my eyes shut, willing the unease away. Whatever was nagging me could wait. We had a week left in Italy and I wasn't about to let a hunch ruin it. Little did I know, back home, the wheels were already turning slowly, quietly, towards something we'd never see coming. The second week in Italy flew by in a haze of golden light and laughter. We toured a vineyard near San Gimignano where a wiry old vintner poured us ruby-red Chianti and told stories of his grandfather's harvest days. Clara, cheeks flushed from the wine, clung to my arm as we wandered rows of gnarled vines. "Harold, we should have done this sooner," she said, her voice bubbling with joy. I nodded, though my cane sank into the soft earth, reminding me why we hadn't. "Time has a way of sneaking up on you." Back at the hotel that night, we sat on our balcony, the Tuscan hills sprawling before us like a painting. Clara sketched in her little notebook something she hadn't done since the kids were small, while I sipped a nightcap. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. That nagging feeling crept back, sharper now, like a splinter working its way deeper. I checked the security app again. The feed loaded this time, our living room dim and still. The ferns looked droopy, but nothing else seemed off. No sign of Tom. I told myself he'd been by earlier, that the plants just needed water. Still, I texted him, "Hey Tom, everything okay?" Ferns looked thirsty. No reply came. The next morning, over breakfast, Clara caught me frowning at my phone. "What's wrong?" she asked, buttering a croissant. I shrugged. "Just checking on Tom. He hasn't answered." She rolled her eyes, playful but firm. "Harold, he's probably busy. You're fussing over nothing." Maybe she was right. Tom wasn't the type to text novels. His first message had been short and sweet. I let it go, and we spent the day in Pisa, marveling at that crooked tower and dodging selfie sticks. But when we got back to the room, I checked again. Still no reply. The app showed the same droopy ferns, the same empty house. A new image popped up from the back door camera, blurry, timestamp 2 a.m. Something moved in the shadows. A raccoon, maybe? Hard to tell. I didn't mention it to Clara. She was packing for our flight home tomorrow, humming an Italian tune she'd picked up. I didn't want to spoil her glow with my paranoia. But that night, I dreamed of our house, dark, hollow, with footsteps echoing where no one should be. I woke in a sweat, the balcony door rattling in the breeze. It was just the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. We'd be home soon and everything would be fine. I'd water the ferns myself, thank Tom with a bottle of scotch, and laugh at how I'd worried over nothing. That's what I thought anyway as we boarded the plane the next day, Italy fading behind us. The truth was waiting, patient and cold, on Maple Lane. The flight back was a slog, turbulence jostling my bones, and a crying baby too rose up, but Clara slept through it, her head on my shoulder. I stared out the window at the clouds, trying to shake that uneasy itch. By the time we landed, jet lag had me in a fog, but I was eager to see Maple Lane, to sink into our own bed. The taxi ride from the airport was quiet, the suburbs rolling by in a familiar blur. Clara clutched her grapevine necklace, smiling faintly. "I'll miss Italy," she said, "but it's good to be home." Our street looked the same as ever, tidy lawns, kids on bikes, the oak tree at the corner shedding early leaves. As the taxi pulled up, I noticed Tom's motorcycle gleaming in his driveway, but his curtains were drawn tight. Odd for a Saturday afternoon, he was usually out puttering around. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to a late night. Our house stood waiting, yellow siding a little duller than I remembered, the porch light flickering. "Furnace must have held up," I muttered, fumbling with my keys. Clara laughed. "You in that furnace? Let's get inside, I need tea." The front door creaked open, and a musty smell hit me, stale air, like the place hadn't been touched in weeks. The ferns in the hall were brown and brittle, drooping over their pots like they'd given up. Clara frowned. "Tom didn't water them?" I set my suitcase down, peering into the living room. The couch cushions were askew, a lamp tilted on its base. "Maybe he's been busy," I said, though my stomach twisted. Something felt off, but I couldn't pin it down. "Jet lag," I told myself. "Just jet lag?" Clara bustled to the kitchen, flipping on lights. "Mail's piled up too," she called, riffling through a stack on the counter. "Bills, catalogs, looks like he hasn't been by much." I checked the thermostat, furnace was fine, humming along. So why hadn't Tom kept up? I grabbed my phone, still no reply to my text. "I'll pop over and thank him," I said, grabbing my cane. Clara waved me off, already filling the kettle. "Tell him to come for dinner tomorrow. I'll make lasagna." Tom's place was quiet when I knocked, no answer. His motorcycle was there, but the garage door hung slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness inside. I peeked in, tools scattered, a tarp bunched in the corner. No Tom. I rang the bell again, then shuffled back home, unease settling heavier. "He's not there," I told Clara. She shrugged. "Probably running errands. We'll catch him later." I nodded, but as we unpacked, I kept glancing out the window. The house felt different, lived in, yet abandoned. That night, I checked the security app again. The blurry back door footage was still there, time-stamped days ago. Something or someone had been here. I just didn't know what it meant yet. Sleep didn't come easy that first night back. The mattress felt lumpy, the house too quiet after Italy's lively hum. Clara snored beside me, blissfully unaware of the thoughts churning in my head. I kept replaying Tom's absence, the wilted ferns, that blurry camera footage. By morning, I was bleary-eyed but determined to figure things out. Clara was already up, brewing coffee and humming her Italian tune. "You look like you wrestled a bear," she teased, sliding a mug my way. I grunted. "Just tired. I'm going to check on Tom again." The air was crisp as I tapped my cane down the sidewalk. Tom's place looked the same, motorcycle parked, curtains shut, garage door still cracked open. I knocked harder this time, calling his name. Nothing. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, poked her head out from across the street, watering can in hand. "Looking for Tom?" she asked, squinting at me. "Haven't seen him in days. Thought he might have gone on a trip." My gut tightened. "He's supposed to be watching our place," I said. She shrugged. "Well, he's been scarce. Maybe check with the post office, mail's been piling up at his box too." "Back home," I told Clara. Her brow furrowed. "That's strange. He seemed so eager to help." I nodded, unease growing. "I'm going to look around here. Something's not right." She waved me off, heading to the garden to salvage what she could of her herbs. I started in the living room, straightening cushions. That's when I noticed it, a faint scuff on the hardwood near the bookshelf, like someone had dragged something heavy. The bookshelf itself looked off, too, tilted slightly, books uneven. I nudged it with my cane. It wobbled more than it should have. Upstairs felt stranger. Our bedroom was fine, but the guest room door was ajar. We always kept it closed. Clara hated dust settling in there. Inside, the rug was bunched up and a drawer in the old dresser hung open, empty. "Clara," I called, hobbling down. She met me in the hall, dirt smudged on her cheek. "What's wrong?" I pointed upstairs. "Guest room's a mess. Someone's been in here." Her eyes widened. "Tom?" I didn't answer. I wasn't sure yet. We checked the basement next. The furnace purred, but a stack of boxes near the back wall, old tax files, photo albums, looked disturbed, lids askew. Clara frowned. "Harold, what's going on?" I shook my head, a cold prickle creeping up my spine. "I don't know. But I'm starting to think Tom wasn't just watering plants." That afternoon, I dug out the security app again, scrolling through days of footage. Most was static, front porch, back door, nothing much. Until I hit a clip from a week ago, Tom, slipping out the back at midnight, a bulky bag slung over his shoulder. My heart sank. What had he taken? The footage of Tom froze me in place, his shadowy figure vanishing into the night with that bag. Clara leaned over my shoulder, her breath catching. "Harold, what's he carrying?" she whispered. I shook my head, jaw tight. "I don't know, but it's not the mail." We watched the clip again, midnight, no hesitation, like he'd done it before. The timestamp was 6 days ago, right in the middle of our trip. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. "We need to figure out what he was up to," I said. Clara's face hardened, a rare steel in her eyes. "Let's search the house. Every inch." We started in the basement where those boxes looked tampered with. I rifled through them, tax stubs, faded Polaroids, nothing missing that I could tell. But one box, buried under the rest, felt lighter than I remembered. It was where we kept old keepsakes, my dad's pocket watch, Clara's mother's brooch. I popped the lid. The watch was there, tarnished but safe. The brooch, though, was gone. Clara gasped. "That was gold, Harold. Real gold." Upstairs, the guest room yielded more, faint scratches on the dresser like someone had pried it open. The bookshelf in the living room was next. I tugged at it and a hollow thud echoed from behind. Clara fetched a flashlight and we peered into the gap. Dust and cobwebs, but also a scuff on the wall, a perfect rectangle like a panel had been moved. My heart raced. "There's something back there," I said. We didn't have the tools to pry it open, but I knew that spot. Years ago, I joked about hiding a safe there. We never did, or so I thought. Clara called the police while I dialed Tom's number again. Straight to voicemail. The cops arrived an hour later, 2 officers with notepads and skeptical looks. "You're saying your neighbor broke in?" one asked, eyeing the footage. "Looks like it," I said. "Stuff's missing, jewelry, maybe more." They took notes, promised to check Tom's place, but warned us not to touch anything else. As they left, Clara gripped my arm. "Harold, what if he's gone for good?" That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced, replaying every chat with Tom. He'd asked odd questions over the years about our savings, our retirement. I'd brushed it off as small talk. Now it felt like reconnaissance. At 2 a.m. I checked the app again. A new clip had uploaded backdoor 3 nights ago. Tom again, same bag, but this time he glanced up right at the camera. His eyes glinted cold and sharp before he slipped away. My stomach dropped. He knew we'd see this. He didn't care. Whatever he'd taken, he was long gone with it, or so I thought. The real shock was still waiting, hidden in plain sight. The next morning, the police returned with news that hit like a punch. Tom's gone, Officer Grant said, standing in our kitchen. House is empty, clothes, bike, all there, but no sign of him. Looks like he cleared out fast. Clara's hand flew to her necklace, fingers trembling. Cleared out? With what? Grant shrugged. We're searching his place. Found some tools, a lock-picking kit. Guy might have been more than a tinkerer. My mind spun. Tom, a thief? The neighbor who'd waved at us for decades? I showed them the footage, Tom's midnight exits, that chilling glance at the camera. Grant nodded. We'll track him, but he's got a head start. Anything else missing? Clara mentioned the brooch, and I pointed out the scuffed bookshelf, the hollow thud. There's something behind there, I said. They brought a crowbar, pried the panel loose. Dust billowed out, revealing a shallow nook. Empty. No safe, no stash, just a faded newspaper from 1983, the year we moved in. Could have been a hiding spot once, Grant said. Whatever was there, it's gone now. After they left, Clara and I sat in stunned silence. How did we miss this? She murmured. I didn't have an answer. Tom had been a fixture, quiet, helpful, invisible in his ordinariness. I grabbed my cane, hobbling to the garage. Something tugged at me, a memory of Tom lingering there once, eyeing my old tool chest. I popped it open. Hammers, wrenches, all there, except one screwdriver, the flathead I'd used to fix the furnace last winter. Its slot was empty. A small thing, but it gnawed at me. That afternoon, I called our son, Mark, in Chicago. Dad, you left Tom in charge, he said, incredulous. Guy always gave me the creeps. I bristled. He was our neighbor, not a stranger. Mark sighed. Check your accounts, just in case. People like that don't stop at jewelry. Clara and I logged into our bank, savings intact, thank goodness. But Mark's words stuck. What else had Tom taken? Late that night, I found it. In the den, under a stack of Italy photos, was a letter, our handwriting, but not our words. A fake note to the bank, dated a week ago, requesting a balance check on a safety deposit box we hadn't touched in years. My blood ran cold. We'd stashed cash there decades back, emergency funds, a nest egg. Clara stared at the forged signature, her voice a whisper. Harold, how much was in there? I didn't want to say it. Not yet. But I knew we had to find out. Tom hadn't just taken trinkets. He'd been planning something bigger, and we'd handed him the key. The forged letter sat on the table like a coiled snake, its implications sinking in. Clara's face was pale, her fingers twisting that grapevine necklace. A safety deposit box, she said, voice shaking. We haven't touched that in years. I nodded, my throat dry. It was our backup plan, cash from the old house sale, some bonds. I figured it was safe there. Safe. The word tasted bitter now. Tom had been in our house, alone, with time to snoop. That screwdriver, the scratch dresser, had he found the key? We drove to the bank first thing, a squat brick building downtown. The manager, a wiry man named Mr. Patel, greeted us with a tight smile. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, good to see you. What brings you in? I slid the fake letter across his desk. This. We didn't write it. Someone's been in our box. His smile faded as he scanned it, then tapped at his computer. Let's check the log. Minutes stretched like hours before he looked up, brow furrowed. Your box was accessed 8 days ago. Signature matches yours, Mr. Thompson. No key used, just the code and ID. Clara gripped my arm. That's impossible. We were in Italy. Patel hesitated. We've got security footage. Let's see. He pulled up a grainy video, a man at the counter, hat low, signing a form. My stomach lurched. The build, the quick hands, it was Tom. That's him, I said, voice hoarse. Our neighbor. Patel's eyes widened. We'll need to report this. Can you confirm what was in there? I swallowed. Cash, bonds, maybe $1 million, give or take. Clara gasped, and Patel's pen froze mid-scribble. Back home, the police took our statement, promising to escalate the search for Tom. $1 million? Grant said, whistling. That's a motive to vanish. They dusted the den for prints, found smudges on the desk where the letter had been. He knew what he was looking for, Grant muttered. I thought of Tom's questions over the years, casual probes about our finances, our habits. He'd been patient, waiting for the perfect chance. Clara sank onto the couch, eyes distant. How did he forge it so well? I paced, mind racing. Then it hit me, the guest room dresser. We'd kept old tax forms there, signatures galore. He'd had weeks to practice. He planned this, I said. Every step. That night, I barely slept, haunted by Tom's grin as I'd handed him the key. The house felt violated every creak a taunt. We trusted him, invited him in. And now, a fortune we'd built over decades might be gone, slipped through our fingers while we sipped wine in Tuscany. The truth was close, I could feel it, but it wasn't ours yet. The bank called the next morning, Mr. Patel's voice grim. "We've opened your box, Mr. Thompson. It's empty, cash, bonds, all gone. Just a few papers left." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. I felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out of me. $1 million, I muttered. He took it all. Patel promised a full investigation, but his tone said it. Tom was a ghost, and our nest egg with him. We hung up, the silence between us heavy as lead. The police swarmed Tom's house that afternoon, lights flashing across Maple Lane. Neighbors gawked as officers hauled out boxes, tools, notebooks, a laptop. Grant pulled us aside. Found a burner phone and some maps. Looks like he'd been planning a move, maybe south, Mexico, or beyond. I clenched my cane. Any sign of the money? He shook his head. Not yet. But he left in a hurry, dishes in the sink, trash overflowing. Something spooked him. Clara and I sat in the den, surrounded by echoes of our old life. She clutched a photo from Italy, our smiles mocking us now. "We worked so hard," she whispered. "For what?" I didn't have an answer. That million wasn't just money, it was security, a legacy for our kids. Tom had stolen more than cash, he'd taken our peace. I thought of his grin, his "I'd be honored" when I'd asked for help. How long had he watched us, waiting? Mark called, furious. "I'm flying in, Dad. We'll sue the bank, track this creep down." I appreciated it, but my fight was draining fast. The police returned later with a notebook from Tom's garage, pages of numbers, dates, sketches. One caught my eye, a rough drawing of our bookshelf, an X on the wall behind it. "He knew about the Nook," I said, voice flat. Grant nodded. "Probably checked it first, then went for the box when he found it empty." That night, I sat alone, staring at the forged letter. Clara slept upstairs, exhausted by grief. I traced my signature, perfect, down to the shaky slant of my H. He'd studied us, turned our trust into a weapon. The security app pinged a new clip uploaded late. Back door, 2 nights ago. Tom, bag in hand, glancing at the camera one last time. A smirk flickered on his face, then he was gone. My blood boiled. He'd known we'd watch helpless. We'd lost everything to a man we'd waved at for years. The police were hopeful, but I wasn't. Tom was out there, living off our sweat while we picked up the pieces. The real blow, though, was still coming, a twist I hadn't seen, lurking in the wreckage of our trust. Tomorrow, I'd find it. Tonight, I just sat, the weight of our mistake crushing me. Morning broke gray and heavy, matching the ache in my bones. Clara shuffled downstairs, eyes red but determined. "We're not giving up, Harold," she said, setting coffee on the table. I nodded, though hope felt distant. The police had called, still no trace of Tom, just a faint lead on a border crossing. Our million was a whisper in the wind. But something nagged me, a loose thread I couldn't let go. That smirk on the footage, too smug, too final. I hobbled to the den, staring at the bookshelf. The Nook was empty, but the scuff marks, the tilted shelves, they whispered secrets. "Clara," I called, "bring the flashlight." She joined me, puzzled, as I ran my hands along the wood. A faint seam caught my finger, a hidden panel, flush with the frame. I pressed, and it clicked. A shallow compartment slid open, dust puffing out. Inside sat a metal box, rusted but intact. My heart thudded. The safe, I breathed. We did install one. Clara's eyes widened as I lifted the lid. Stacks of cash, crisp bonds, our million, untouched. Relief flooded me, then confusion. But the bank, Clara grabbed the forged letter, then froze. "Harold, look." The date 8 days ago was smudged, rewritten. The original was months back, before Italy. I checked the security app, rewatched Tom's exits. The bag he carried, it wasn't bulky enough for $1 million. Just the brooch, maybe some papers. It hit me like a freight train. Tom hadn't taken the money. The bank had lied or messed up. We checked the wrong box, an old one we'd closed years ago, emptied out long before. Tom had snooped, found the safe, but couldn't crack it. His smirk wasn't victory, it was defeat. He'd fled with trinkets, thinking he'd lost the big prize. I laughed, a ragged sound, as Clara clutched the cash. "He didn't get it," she said, tears spilling. "It was here all along." We called the police, the bank sorted the mess. Tom was a thief, but a small-time one. The real fortune never left Maple Lane. That night, we sat together, the safe locked tight, our trust shaken but our future secure. I thought of Tom's grin, his easy, "I'd be honored." We'd handed him our keys, our lives, and nearly lost it all, not to his cunning but to our own blindness. The moral stung as I turned it over, you shouldn't trust everyone. Neighbors, friends, they can wear masks, hide greed behind smiles. We'd learned it the hard way, jetting off to Italy while a viper coiled in our nest. But we'd survived, wiser, wary. Trust is a gift, not a given, and next time, I'd keep the key close.